Welcome to the Leadership Lyceum, a CEO's virtual mentor. Now, here's your host, Tom Lindquist.
Glad to have you back in the Leadership Lyceum, where we bring you direct access to top CEOs and directors of boards in an interview format that provides insight on situational issues that confront CEOs every day. It is a CEO's virtual mentor. Welcome to episode 6. This is part 2 of a 2-part interview with Andy Mooney, CEO of Fender Musical Instruments Corporation. You'll recall from part 1 that I joined Andy in his new Hollywood offices, which were still in the finishing touches of the build-out on September 14th, 2016. We had a sweeping conversation covering his leadership at Fender, his product orientation and brand focus, and industry innovation that he's leading at Fender. In this part 2 of 2, we'll specifically discuss new product launches and touch on many of the considerations, from supply chain to marketing and communications. We'll also discuss product growth and pricing. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. We'll rejoin the interview with Andy where we left off in part 1. Enjoy. Turning back towards leadership in the business, what were you surprised about in coming in?
Given the scale of the company, we're about a $500 million company. I was surprised at how heavily siloed the functions were in the company. We own 2 significant manufacturing plants, Corona, California and Ensenada, Mexico. Supply chain was in its silo. Product line management was in its silo. And the industry, which I know painfully well, being on the consumer side for decades, it has a terrible reputation of introducing new products on time. The brands would say, okay, I'm going to deliver my next new guitar, my next new amp is going to be delivered in March, which means, like most contracting jobs, you might get it in June if you're lucky. And to be honest, the industry, I think, had just adjusted to that. It was kind of like, oh, okay, yeah, we'll believe it. We'll get it when we get it. We like the product, but we'll get it when we get it. And I think the existence of silos has somewhat created that result. So one of the things I set out to do very early on was to create processes that naturally interconnected people towards delivery of shared goals. I don't generally like to operate through edict, but one edict that I did put out was, we're going to deliver when we say we're going to deliver. Mm-hmm. And whatever we have to do differently in terms of process, we have to decide what it is and do it. So as of this year, we've started to really execute at a much, much higher level. So that was probably the only significant surprise, and it was relatively easily curable, and there was no pushback within the organization. There was no desire not to do it. But one of the kind of unknown secrets of Nike is how phenomenally good they were at process management. They just outblocked and tackled a lot of people in the industry. So my goal here is to do the same. If the bar is low in terms of delivering on promise, in terms of new product delivery, then we want to absolutely lead the way in terms of doing that.
What's an example, Andy, of you bringing those 2 groups together in that regard, breaking the silo up? What's an example of?
Well, one of the things I started almost immediately was I created a project management office and the leader for that function who reported directly to me. So we said that the tracking of new product introductions was going to be the first major project that he was going to undertake. But I really set out not to say it was his responsibility, it was our collective responsibility, but what he was going to do was to provide the tools and the tracking mechanism that enabled everybody to work through the issues that chronically had stopped us from delivering on time. Mm-hmm. Because there would be miscommunication here or non-communication there, or the ball would be dropped in one function and that was not well understood by the other function. We set out to have long-term product line plans. We were crystal clear on what new products we were going to introduce by season. We then created the tracking tools for progress, unbelievably simple stuff. Red light, green light, yellow light. Where are we on each of these issues? Anything that's not green, let's sit in the room and figure out what compromises, if that is the case. Do we need to compromise? Do we need to move the release date back? What we found was almost zero occasions where we had to move release dates back, that there was a way to work through the issues that normally would have caused us to be late on delivery. And a lot of these issues are caused by, as is always the case, product line management is always pushing to innovate. And innovation, strange as it may seem, some cases it's as simple as color application. One color of paint is much more difficult to apply on a guitar than another. And if that color of paint is the one that you want to market, you want to be absolutely sure that you're starting that SKU early enough in the process so you have sufficient quantities. The other thing that's changed to the unbelievable positive is that slightly before I joined, a new CMO came on board. He and I, although we didn't spend much time together, he was brought on before I joined. He's ex-Nike too, so we can talk in shorthand. But we set out to find cost savings in other area to spend more money on pull marketing. And particularly in the kind of digital ether, in addition to kind of being in the Bibles of the industry, the kind of corporate media. And what we found was, again, engaging with artists produced a quantum leap in demand for the product. And a classic example was we launched 2 signature products this year. One was with Edge. Edge did the signature guitar for us, and we now have set up the ability to basically track our progress on digital marketing in real time through the web. So when the Rolling Stone article on Edge's guitar and the thought process it went through, when it released on rollingstone.com, you could literally see the monitors light up like Christmas trees, with people actually searching the retail landscape to find out where they could buy the guitar. In his case, he then pushed that out into his social media, as did Flea when we released the signature bass with him. And in both cases, it's one thing to sit down with a sales organization and a retail organization and say, Edge is going to distribute this amongst his 25 million fans. That doesn't really mean that much to them. Now it's starting to mean something to them, because what it means is I should buy more. And it was very similar case with Flea. Flea pushed it in through his social media, and massive pickup. Flea's bass was made in a color called shell pink. And again, the industry was saying, pink bass guitars, I'm not sure we'll sell many pink bass guitars. I said, this is going to go out into Flea's ecosystem. Yeah. You may want to buy some more. And basically the industry sold out in the first week. But it's actually, what's happening now as we go back to them and we talk about our future plans, we can refer to, remember when we said we're going to do this? You may want to buy some more. Yeah. And we found that even in the launch of a natural evolution of one of our premier guitars, we launched a guitar called the American Elite this year. We've got years and years of forecast information that said we'd sell X. We had a robust marketing campaign around it, and we sold X plus 50%. So the other thing that we're finding is that if you look at that wall represents guitars that go from 1955 to 2015. Okay. The basic form hasn't changed that much. But if you're into the nuances, it's evolved really significantly. But you need to really kind of go into the detail to the right consumer to explain why they should go out and buy this new model. And we did a great job of that with the American Elite. And for those consumers where that level of detail mattered, it really made a huge difference in the uptick of demand. And the whole industry, we found that the month that we released the product, the whole industry grew by 8%, which hadn't happened in the industry for a while.
That's amazing. And back to the supply chain piece, when you've got someone like Flea or The Edge endorsing this and featuring and blasting it out to their connections, you better be ready from a supply chain standpoint with that.
No, you're absolutely right. What we've had to do is completely change our inventory carrying protocols. In that, we now estimate that we need two things. In the case of Fleas, the primary medium for the product launch was Instagram. I happened to be in Australia with a bunch of retailers the day that Instagram launched, and they were literally sitting in the room on their iPhones going, my phone's lighting up, people want to buy this Flea guitar. And they didn't have it. Because they said, well, it's being launched in the US first, we're going to get it 3 months later. I go, that's old thinking. If it's Instagram, it has to be day and date. Mm-hmm. And what we found is that it's like a news cycle. There's a lot of intensity at the front end of the news cycle, and then it starts to tail off. So we feel that we need about 50% of our first year's forecast available and distributed through the network on day of launch, which is a big change from where we've been historically. It means we've got to start earlier in R&D, we've got to start earlier in production, we've got to be able to distribute into every nook and cranny of the world on the day that the digital campaign launches. Those are all changes that we've had to adapt to in the last 18 months.
Let's take a quick break, and we'll be right back. We're back with Andy Mooney, CEO of Fender. Well, it's a beautiful problem to have that you're looking at. We've got to be prepared for explosive growth over a short period of time.
Yeah, one of the things I found really exciting about the potential in the core business, which was probably the only other thing that surprised me, and it surprised me immensely to the positive, but one of the things, I was 15 years in Nike and always paranoid about where growth was going to come from. Made a presentation to the board to move into the equipment segment, which was a very big segment, but there was a lot of skepticism in the company about the value of that segment relative to the footwear and apparel. But nonetheless, we decided to move into that segment, and I was assigned the task of doing it. So it was essentially, after 15 years, it was essentially doing a startup. One of the categories that we went into, because I thought this would be easy, would be batting gloves. The brands that were in there were not particularly noteworthy. Mm-hmm. The product was okay. So I felt we could do better product, and I was probably arrogant in my assumption that we'd get 20% market share just by showing up. We got 2% market share, and I immediately went into what did I do wrong mode. And then somewhere in the conversation with the team, it came out that we had 2% of the MLB roster was wearing the product. And I go, well, I've never really thought of it in those terms before. I said, let's go through all of the categories, both NCAA and all of the pro leagues, and let's count up the numbers of players on the roster that we have in our product and our share in that category. The correlation was shocking. It was almost a total one-to-one correlation.
That is amazing that it is.
So, if you look at a category like basketball these days, Nike has 90% share.
Yeah.
Because 90% of the NBA and NCAA players are wearing Nike product. If you look at all of the stages of the major festivals last year, 90% of the artists were using Fender. We have about 35% share. So my view is, before I say what I'm going to say, one of the things I found in Nike, there was always a time lag between getting the artists, the athletes to adopt your product, and then your share caught up.
Interesting.
So my belief is the correlation in music may not be quite as strong, but it's strong. Uh-huh. So I believe we've got unbelievable potential to grow into our share of stage, if you look at it in those terms.
It's interesting because your correlation factor is different, but you talk about lag time. I think if you're promoting it in the right way through the Edge's social media and Flea and their social media, it seems like the lag time is a lot less. You're able to time things a little bit more predictively maybe than you would be.
Well, I think probably the distinction is, I always looked at, as one of the beautiful things about the athletic footwear business is that you wear the product out. And next year you got to buy your sneaks for school or for sport or whatever reason, but you got to refresh your wardrobe all the time. You don't have to do that with a guitar, and in many cases you're dropping $2,000 for a guitar and maybe another $1,000 for an amp. So it's a very considered purchase, and you can often get the same result by buying used as opposed to new. So what we're finding is that the correlations, we're gaining share, the correlation's closing. What we need to do is to figure out how do we accelerate that. What are the barriers that either are presented internally, what are presented by the retailers? How do we get the consumers to ask for our brand vis-a-vis other brands more strongly than they're doing right now? Nobody really tracks what percentage of the used market that we have.
Yeah.
But we do have to take that into consideration. The way that I take it into consideration is I've got to give a player a reason to buy a new American Elite vis-a-vis a 1984 American Standard. And I think we did a really good job of that this year, and we have to do an even better job of it in the future. But it's tremendous to think that we've got that much runway for growth in our core business still.
Related to the point you just made, and it's interesting thinking about the used market. There's a beautiful video on YouTube in the Fullerton facility in 1959 showing them making things by hand. You've probably seen it. But what's really striking when you watch that, you think that maybe some of those guitars you're watching being produced right there are fetching $50,000 to $100,000 right now. As you think about what you're manufacturing in 2016, what do you want the value of those to be 60 years from now or so? And do you think about that at all? Maybe you don't, Andy.
Well, there's probably two routes to value creation. And again, I'll give you a little bit of history from Nike, which was one of my periods at Nike. I worked in a division called Special Makeups, which did exclusive product for the larger retailers. And I just had started earning enough money that I could buy a used Porsche. I bought a used 924 Porsche, a black one. And I drove that proudly to the office on the first day and stopped at the traffic lights next to the office, and some guy drove up alongside me in a fly yellow Porsche 924 Sebring. I said, what the hell is that? And of course it was just a limited edition variation of the car I was driving, but it was $5,000 more. And my thought was, well, I wonder if that would work for shoes. So we created a line called Limited Edition, literally put them on Limited Edition, hang tag on it. The products I had been working on were usually price derivatives of what was in the product line. This was completely the opposite. This was taking the highest price point products that we had in the line, upgrading the leathers, and charging premium pricing for them, and actually pushing them out in limited quantity. We did 50 million in the first launch. What creates the value is the scarcity. In some cases, it's from an association with an athlete. I wish I had kept every year of every pair that Michael Jordan had worn. I've got about 6 of them stuffed away in a closet at home. I haven't looked lately at what they're worth. At Fender, we have the custom shop in Corona, California. We purposely limit the output of that shop. Some of the master builders who are in that shop, where buyers ask specifically for them to make their guitar, have waiting lists of up to 2 years to get a product. So we have our own, essentially, limited edition program that creates the value for those instruments. That gold guitar that's over there is one of the second run of product that ever came out of the custom shop. There was only 500 of those ever made. That's a pretty valuable guitar these days. And then there's the signature models, which over time develop also can increase value. And then there's just the ones that become scarce because of their age more than anything else. There's a 52 and a 55 Strat, a 52 Telly on the wall there. So age is a factor, but I think increasingly it's really the uniqueness of the guitar and the fact that it's in very limited distribution. Mm-hmm. And in the case of Masterbuilt, there's only one.
I see.
There's one guitar on the wall there that there was only one made of when I was at Disney.
And then what about Leo's Angels Midas touch factor of Eric Clapton, or one of the greats playing the guitar?
Well, one of the things I found in my Nike days was it's the athletes, artists. They are immensely important to the brand. But it's both quality and quantity. In some ways, for Nike, Boise State was just as important as Michael Jordan. Mm-hmm. Because I think Adidas very early on signed Kobe Bryant and were pounding their chests about how they were going to make big inroads into Nike's share. And I just kind of laughed internally because I'd gone through that exercise. Mm-hmm. So having a guy like, Eric Clapton, Yngwie Malmsteen, Richie Blackmore, mm-hmm. the value is immeasurable, but it's having the guy on stage, the working musician on stage who's sweating it out every night just to pay his bills. It's just as important.
Thank you so much, Andy.
Thank you.
That concludes episode 6 of the Leadership Lyceum with Andy Mooney, CEO of Fender Musical Instruments. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. Join us for episode 7 right around December 1st. In the meantime, happy Thanksgiving. The Leadership Lyceum, a CEO's virtual mentor, has been a production of the Leadership Lyceum, LLC, copyright 2016, all rights reserved. Come back and listen. It's lonely at the top.